There are books that try to comfort you, books that try to inspire you, and books that try to explain how change happens. Can't Hurt Me does something more confrontational than all three. It looks the listener straight in the face and asks an uncomfortable question. What if the life you are living is much smaller than the life you are capable of living? What if the limits you respect most are not physical facts, but mental agreements? And what if your greatest obstacle is not the difficulty of the world, but the way you have learned to negotiate with discomfort, fear, shame, and pain? David Goggins built this book around those questions. The result is not a soft, reassuring message. It is a hard-edged invitation to stop waiting for ideal conditions and start building a stronger mind. Can't Hurt Me is part memoir and part operating manual for personal transformation. It tells the story of a man who grew up in chaos, abuse, racism, poverty, and self-doubt, and who later turned himself into a symbol of extreme mental toughness. But the point of the story is not simply that he survived. The point is that he used suffering as a forge. He trained himself to stop seeing pain as a final wall and start seeing it as a test of identity. Throughout this summary, we are not just looking at the events of his life. We are looking at the philosophy those events produce. The central claim of the book is that most people live far below their real capacity. We pull back early. We surrender quickly. We tell ourselves that tired means done, that failure means stop, that discomfort means danger, and that our past defines the size of our future. Goggins does not believe any of that has to remain true. He argues that the mind can be trained. It can be hardened. It can be expanded. And once that happens, a person begins to relate to work, fear, discipline, setbacks, and even suffering in a completely different way. This is why the book has struck such a nerve with so many readers. It is not just about athletic feats, military hardship, or extreme endurance. It is about the parts of human life everyone recognizes: procrastination, avoidance, excuses, insecurity, resentment, self-pity, and the quiet fear that maybe we are not enough. Goggins answers all of that with one relentless idea. You do not discover strength by waiting to feel strong. You discover it by doing hard things before you feel ready, and then learning from the evidence that you survived them. To understand the force behind Goggins' philosophy, you have to begin with the life he describes before transformation. He does not present himself as naturally confident, naturally disciplined, or naturally gifted. He begins with pain. His childhood is framed by fear, abuse, instability, and humiliation. These early experiences matter because they shape the emotional backdrop of the entire book. He grows up exposed to forces that teach powerlessness. And powerlessness, over time, has a way of turning into identity. When a person feels trapped long enough, helplessness begins to feel normal. Dreams shrink. Standards drop. Survival replaces aspiration. That is one of the book's first insights. A damaged beginning can produce not only pain, but also a deep internal agreement with limitation. Later in life, Goggins describes becoming overweight, directionless, and disappointed in himself. He knows he is not living at the level he could live at, but knowledge alone does not create change. This matters because many people live in exactly that gap. They know they are capable of more, but they remain frozen by habit, shame, confusion, or fear of effort. Goggins makes clear that transformation does not begin with inspiration alone. It begins with a breaking point, a moment when the cost of staying the same finally becomes intolerable. In the story he tells, pain is not removed before growth begins. Pain is what makes growth necessary. What makes this section of the book powerful is the refusal to romanticize the past. Goggins does not say that suffering automatically builds character. Many people suffer and remain trapped. Suffering can distort a person, harden them in destructive ways, or leave them hopeless. The difference, in his telling, comes when suffering is converted into fuel. That conversion requires a decision. It requires saying that what happened to me is real, but it will not be the final authority over who I become. That is the beginning of self-definition. It is the point where a person stops treating the past as destiny and starts treating it as material. This is one of the book's deepest themes. Identity is not fixed by biography. It is shaped by what you repeatedly do with the hand you were dealt. Goggins' story is extreme in its details, but the underlying pattern is universal. Many people are carrying some version of old humiliation, old neglect, old fear, old social comparison, old failure, or old self-contempt. The book says that these burdens are heavy, but they do not have to become permanent architecture. A person can begin again, not by pretending the past did not matter, but by refusing to let it define the outer edge of possibility. That is why the memoir is important. It is not just backstory. It is evidence that a life can move from reaction to authorship, from inherited pain to chosen standards, from being formed by circumstances to forging character in spite of them. One of the most famous ideas in Can't Hurt Me is what Goggins calls the 40% rule. The phrase is memorable because it is simple, but its real power comes from what it reveals about the human mind. The basic idea is that when people believe they are done, they are often nowhere near their true limit. The mind throws up warning signals early. It wants relief, safety, ease, and the return of control. It says stop long before the body is truly incapable of continuing. Goggins uses this idea to challenge one of the most common assumptions in everyday life, that the feeling of being spent is the same thing as being finished. In his view, it is not. It is often just the point where the negotiation begins. This matters far beyond physical endurance. Think about difficult work, learning a new skill, repairing a damaged relationship, building a business, recovering from loss, or trying to create a new life. Again and again, people reach a point of internal resistance and assume they have reached their limit. But often they have simply reached the place where comfort loses its grip and real growth starts asking for payment. The 40% rule is less about an exact number and more about a way of seeing. It is a psychological challenge to the story the mind tells in moments of strain. That story usually sounds convincing. I cannot do more. I am not built for this. This is too much. I have nothing left. Goggins teaches the listener to become suspicious of those conclusions. Not dismissive of pain, but suspicious of finality. One of the strongest implications of this idea is that capacity is not fully visible from the inside when you are under stress. In difficult moments, the mind gives an incomplete report. It exaggerates danger and underestimates endurance. So the person who wants to grow has to learn how to test the report. Can I do one more rep, one more page, one more hour, one more honest conversation, one more disciplined choice? This turns toughness into experiment. Instead of worshiping the first feeling of resistance, you probe it. You lean a little farther. You discover that what felt impossible was often just deeply uncomfortable. That discovery is transformative because it changes self-trust. Once a person experiences this enough times, they stop taking every signal of discomfort as a command. They start seeing it as information, sometimes useful, sometimes exaggerated, never automatically sovereign. This is how the 40% rule becomes a life principle. It trains you to look at your own limits with curiosity instead of surrender. It asks you to consider that your panic may not be prophecy, your fatigue may not be final, and your current ceiling may not be real. In that sense, the idea is not simply about pushing harder. It is about seeing yourself more accurately. And a more accurate view of your potential can change everything. If the 40% rule expands what seems possible, accountability explains how change actually begins. Goggins is relentless on this point. Before you can build a stronger life, you have to tell the truth about the life you are living now. Not the polished version. Not the excuse-heavy version. Not the version designed to protect your ego. The truth. This is one of the hardest teachings in the book because most people are not lying in dramatic ways. They are lying in small, familiar ways that make comfort easier to preserve. They say they are too busy when really they are disorganized. They say they are unlucky when really they are underprepared. They say they need motivation when really they need discipline. They say they are trying when really they are dabbling. Goggins' approach cuts straight through that fog. He argues that growth starts when self-deception ends. That kind of honesty is painful because it strips away the emotional shelter built by excuses. But it is also liberating because reality, once faced, can be worked on. This is where one of the book's most memorable practices comes into view: the use of uncompromising self-assessment. The point of such practices is not to humiliate yourself. It is to stop letting vague intention masquerade as progress. If your body is unhealthy, say so. If your mind is undisciplined, say so. If your habits are weak, say so. If fear is running your life, say so. Once truth is named clearly, action becomes more precise. And precision matters. General guilt rarely changes people. Specific truth can. This principle has wide application. In work, accountability means measuring actual output instead of admiring your potential. In relationships, it means noticing the ways pride, avoidance, or resentment shape your behavior. In personal growth, it means tracking whether your daily life reflects your stated values. Goggins' broader claim is that most people want the rewards of transformation without the emotional cost of honest confrontation. They want confidence without proof, respect without discipline, results without exposure of weakness. But the book insists that weakness seen clearly is the beginning of strength. What remains hidden remains in charge. Another important part of accountability in this book is personal ownership. Goggins does not deny that injustice, trauma, and external barriers are real. What he rejects is handing them control over the future. Ownership means refusing to let explanation become resignation. It means asking, what can I do from here? What can I control? What standard can I hold? What am I avoiding because I do not want to feel inadequate? This is why accountability, in his philosophy, is not punishment. It is power. The moment you stop outsourcing your life to circumstance, mood, or excuse, you become dangerous in the best possible way. You become someone who can move. One of the harshest, but most useful ideas in Can't Hurt Me is that comfort can quietly weaken a person. Not all comfort is bad, of course. Rest matters. Safety matters. Recovery matters. But Goggins is speaking about a deeper pattern, the habit of organizing life so that challenge is minimized and discomfort is avoided whenever possible. That pattern creates fragility. The person becomes less tolerant of frustration, less resilient under pressure, less capable of staying steady when conditions turn unfavorable. So Goggins proposes a counter-practice. He calls for what is often described as callousing the mind. Just as physical skin thickens through friction, the mind grows tougher through repeated exposure to difficult effort. This is one of the book's signature insights. Strength is not built only in moments of major crisis. It is built in everyday acts of chosen hardship. Waking up early when you do not want to. Training when you would rather quit. Studying when distraction is easier. Telling the truth when image management would feel safer. Finishing the task when the novelty is gone. These moments are not glamorous, but they're where identity changes. Each time you refuse to obey the first impulse toward comfort, you send a signal to yourself. I am not ruled by convenience. I can do hard things on purpose. Over time, those signals accumulate into character. What makes this powerful is that it shifts the meaning of discomfort. Instead of treating discomfort as proof that something is wrong, you begin to treat it as a training ground. That does not mean every pain should be embraced blindly. Wisdom still matters. But in the moral and psychological sense, the book argues that discomfort is often the price of enlargement. If you want a bigger life, a more disciplined mind, a more trustworthy self, then you cannot remain addicted to ease. Goggins' larger point is that the modern world offers endless opportunities for escape. Entertainment, excuses, softness, numbing, distraction, rationalization. None of these are necessarily evil, but together they can make a person passive. They teach the mind to flinch. The antidote is not theatrical suffering. It is purposeful friction. Doing a little more than you want. Holding yourself to a higher standard than your mood prefers. Refusing to stop at the first point of resistance. This is how mental armor is built. Not by talking about resilience, but by practicing it in increasingly real conditions. There is also a spiritual dimension to this idea. A person who repeatedly walks into discomfort with intention becomes less afraid of life. Uncertainty still exists. Pain still hurts. But fear no longer governs everything. The person knows from experience that they can endure more than they once believed. And that knowledge changes how they move through the world. They are harder to break because they have rehearsed challenge instead of fleeing from it. Most people experience failure as a personal verdict. They do not merely think, "This did not work." They think, "This says something final about me." Goggins tries to destroy that interpretation. In his worldview, failure is painful, often humiliating, sometimes infuriating, but still useful. It exposes. It reveals where training was inadequate, where discipline was thin, where ego was inflated, where preparation was shallow, where fear still held power. In other words, failure gives information. And information, if you are willing to use it, can become leverage. This is one of the book's most valuable lessons because it turns setbacks from endings into diagnostics. Instead of asking only, "How do I avoid losing?" Goggins teaches the listener to ask, "What is this failure showing me? Where exactly did I break? Was it my body, my planning, my focus, my patience, my honesty, my commitment, my skill, or my willingness to keep going when things became ugly?" Those questions are transformative because they move attention from wounded pride to usable truth. The book also suggests that many people quit too early because they are emotionally untrained in the experience of failure. They think failing means they should retreat and protect the ego. But if failure becomes familiar, and if it is interpreted correctly, it loses some of its power to dominate identity. It becomes part of the process of hardening. This is why Goggins can speak of failure with a kind of respect. Not because it feels good, but because it breaks illusion. It removes fantasy and replaces it with reality. And reality, though often harsh, is the one place real progress can happen. This perspective is especially useful in a culture obsessed with polished success. People often see outcomes without seeing the long chain of embarrassment, correction, repeated attempts, and stubborn persistence behind them. Can't Hurt Me reminds us that growth is rarely elegant. It is messy, repetitive, and often humiliating. But humiliation survived can become strength. Rejection survived can become clarity. Underperformance studied can become confidence. The person who learns from failure becomes steadily less fragile because their identity is no longer tied to always looking capable. It becomes tied to becoming more capable. That is a profound shift. It makes room for ambition without vanity. It allows a person to chase hard things without requiring constant reassurance. And it transforms adversity from enemy into instructor. A major theme running through the book is that confidence should be built on evidence, not fantasy. Many people want to feel more confident, but they try to get there through language alone. They repeat affirmations, imagine success, or wait for the right internal state to arrive. Goggins does not dismiss mindset, but he insists that durable confidence comes from proof. Proof that you kept going when you wanted to stop. Proof that you finished the work. Proof that you endured the hard season. Proof that you told the truth. Proof that you came back after failure. Proof that you can trust yourself. This is where several of his recurring mental tools matter. He emphasizes drawing strength from remembered victories, not necessarily glamorous victories, but moments when you endured more than expected or did what was required despite resistance. The reason this matters is that identity changes through accumulated evidence. If you repeatedly act like someone disciplined, eventually discipline stops feeling like costume and starts feeling like character. If you repeatedly choose courage in small moments, courage becomes more available in large ones. The book teaches that self-respect is earned in this way. Not purchased with admiration, not granted by others, and not secured by talent alone. Earned through behavior aligned with a chosen standard. This is deeply practical. If you want to become more resilient, you must create memories that prove resilience. If you want to become more focused, you must practice deep work consistently enough that focus is no longer rare. If you want to become more trustworthy, you must keep promises to yourself so often that self-betrayal starts to feel unacceptable. Goggins is really talking about identity as a byproduct of repeated action. That is why the book has such urgency. Every day, through habit, a person is collecting evidence about who they are. The question is whether the evidence points toward weakness and avoidance, or toward strength and reliability. This view also makes change feel more available. You do not have to transform all at once. You have to begin creating different proof. One hard task done honestly. One excuse refused. One standard upheld. Then another. Then another. In time, what once felt impossible becomes familiar, and what once felt like your personality reveals itself to have been only your conditioning. Another clear lesson from Can't Hurt Me is that motivation is unreliable. It rises and falls with sleep, mood, weather, stress, emotion, novelty, and external reward. If your life depends on feeling inspired, your effort will always be unstable. Goggins argues for something harder and far more dependable: discipline. Discipline means acting in alignment with a standard even when emotion is absent. It means making a decision once and then honoring it repeatedly instead of renegotiating it every day. This is a crucial distinction. Motivation asks, "Do I feel like it?" Discipline asks, "What did I say I was going to do?" One produces bursts. The other produces transformation. In practical terms, the book invites the listener to stop building life around preference. The workout, the study session, the difficult email, the long-term project, the recovery process, the habit change, the truth-telling conversation, none of these become easier just because you admire them. They become real when you perform them consistently. Goggins' own life story dramatizes this principle through extreme examples, but the core idea is universal. Greatness is often less about rare intensity and more about repeated obedience to a standard. This way of thinking is liberating because it reduces drama. You do not need to constantly ask how to get in the mood. You need systems, routines, and commitments that carry you when the mood disappears. You do not need to feel fearless before beginning. You need to begin despite fear. You do not need certainty before effort. You need effort that can produce clarity. There is also moral strength in this idea. A disciplined person is less controlled by appetite, impulse, convenience, and excuse. They become more stable, more dependable, more internally ordered. In a world filled with distraction, that stability is a serious advantage. It creates momentum. And once momentum exists, many tasks that once felt emotionally expensive begin to feel simply normal. This is one of the quiet gifts of discipline. It turns effort from constant battle into identity. The person stops asking whether they are the type who can do hard things. They have already answered that question through repetition. Because David Goggins' story includes military training and extreme endurance, some listeners may be tempted to admire the book without applying it. That would miss the deeper point. Can't Hurt Me is not fundamentally a book about becoming David Goggins. It is a book about refusing to remain trapped in your current excuses. The philosophy can be applied almost anywhere. In physical health, it means accepting that your body reflects your habits more than your hopes. It means doing the boring work of consistency and refusing to let temporary discomfort control the standard. In work, it means producing more than you talk about producing. It means tolerating frustration, learning skills deeply, and staying engaged after novelty fades. In study, it means choosing concentration over distraction and understanding that mastery often feels tedious before it feels rewarding. In relationships, it can mean confronting pride, staying honest, apologizing cleanly, listening without defensiveness, and taking responsibility for the atmosphere you help create. In emotional life, it means refusing to let old wounds become permanent permissions for weakness. It means acknowledging pain without building a home inside it. One practical way to use the book's philosophy is to identify the places where you habitually retreat. Not your obvious strengths. Your retreat points. The tasks you postpone. The truths you avoid. The disciplines you start but do not sustain. The situations where you quickly become fragile, resentful, or self-pitying. Those are often the places where growth is waiting. Another useful application is to create deliberate hardship in manageable forms. That might be exercising with consistency, setting focused work blocks, limiting distraction, keeping clear promises, or doing one thing every day that challenges comfort. The exact form matters less than the principle. You are retraining your relationship with difficulty. You are teaching yourself not to flee the first edge of resistance. The book is also valuable for people carrying hidden shame. Goggins repeatedly demonstrates that a broken self-image can be changed through action. Not instantly and not without pain, but changed. You may not believe in yourself yet. You may not feel strong. You may not trust your mind. Still, you can begin collecting proof. And proof, over time, changes the internal conversation. That is why the philosophy remains so potent. It respects the reality of pain but does not worship it. It respects the reality of weakness, but does not declare it permanent. It respects the difficulty of change, but still insists that change is available to those willing to pay the price in effort, honesty, and disciplined discomfort. The lasting power of Can't Hurt Me comes from the way it reframes human potential. It does not say life will become easy. It says you can become stronger. It does not promise the removal of fear, pain, or doubt. It argues that these things lose some of their authority when you stop surrendering to them automatically. That is an important distinction. Goggins is not offering a fantasy of invulnerability. He is offering a discipline of transformation. The person who practices it does not become untouched by difficulty. They become less easily ruled by it. This final idea may be the deepest one in the entire book. Freedom is not found in arranging a life without friction. Freedom is found in becoming the kind of person who can move through friction without collapsing. The past may still ache. The body may still tire. The mind may still panic. Circumstances may still turn against you. But if you have built an armored mind, if you have trained yourself to tell the truth, if you have practiced going farther than comfort prefers, if you have turned failure into instruction and discipline into identity, then you begin to carry a different kind of strength. It is not loud all the time. It is not always visible. But it is there. And when life demands something difficult, it answers. That is the challenge Goggins leaves with the reader. Stop negotiating with weakness as though it is your nature. Stop treating your current limits as sacred. Stop waiting to feel ready, healed, motivated, or fully confident before beginning. Begin where you are. Tell the truth. Do the hard thing. Build proof. Repeat. Over time, the person who does this becomes unfamiliar to their former self. More capable. More honest. More stable under pressure. Less interested in excuses. Less dependent on comfort. More willing to endure. More able to finish. In that sense, Can't Hurt Me is not ultimately about punishment or extreme performance. It is about reclaiming the unused territory inside a human life. It is about finding out how much more is there once you stop obeying every impulse to retreat. And it leaves us with a sobering but exhilarating thought. You may be far stronger than your current habits allow you to know.